aside from being intentional, and I could delve into that a bit, I would only say two words.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of CFI's Member Spotlight. Today, I'm so excited to be here with Devrhoid Davis. Hi, Devrhoid.
Hi, Mian.
And where are you joining us from? Because I think you're the very first person that's going to be joining us from this geographic location, so it's very exciting.
Yes. So hi, Mian. I'm in Kingston, Jamaica right now.
Amazing. And I'm so excited to talk to you, especially because the way that I found you was combing through LinkedIn. I saw that you had completed a lot of our programs, and that's always really exciting. But I saw your background, and it was so unique. And I'm always looking for someone that is, kind of has their own very unique story to tell. Everyone, of course, like everyone is a unique individual, has their own story. But you started off in medical radiation physics, and I have
Yes.
never seen a jump from there to where you are today. And so I am so excited to be having you on the show. And I just want to be able to put more kind of content and general information out there to all of our CFI users and anyone who decides to join us to see more of themselves in everyone that finds CFI and is successful like you are. To see that you don't have to be a one size fits all. You don't have to go from a business program to an internship at some sort of financial institution and continue onward. I love seeing that people find their interest in finance from all sorts of different areas. And so I would love for you to share with us your unique and super exciting finance origin story. Like, how did you get from medical radiation physics to where you are today, kind of like fill in the gaps, but also what made you like what got you interested in medical radiation physics? Like, how did it all
Okay.
start?
Sure. So we're going to have to go a little ways back to high school. So I attended high school in Clarendon, where I'm originally from in Jamaica, called Clarendon College. And there I really pursued the sciences. I've always been curious about physics specifically and really how things work. So I would dismantle small toys or radios whilst I was growing up. And I was always interested in mechanics and so on. Interestingly, and this will play a role as we get down more into the conversation, but my father was actually an accountant. And so, aside from my interest in electronics and gadgets and physics and all those work, almost every night I would have to do a bit of accounting when he would come home because he would actually give us cash. So he ran a small business and he was a taxi operator. So he would give us the cash to count. So we would have to count and tabulate it and do all of that and tell him what his profit was for the day. So that's the accounting origin, actually. So at Clarendon College, I actually pursued the sciences because of that interest in understanding physics and how things work. So I did the natural sciences, got introduced to biology really in third form, thereabout, what you might call ninth grade. And I started to really become interested in the mix of the two, physics and biology, and seeing how really a lot of things in nature were inspired by biology, again, towards that end of trying to understand how things worked. So ultimately, that led me from Clarendon College to the University of the West Indies, where I studied medical physics as my major and bioengineering. And
I have a question for you.
sure.
So you said that you like to take things apart, learn how things work. And for me, like so I have several engineers in my life. Like I've worked with several, especially at the bank. It's a very kind of popular
Yes.
non-business program to come from. Engineering is the
Yes.
first one. My husband is a mechanical engineer. Did you ever consider engineering? Because as soon as you said you like to take things apart, especially like your toys, understand how it works, the first thing I hear is like engineer.
Yes. So to be fully transparent, my actual degree is in medical physics and bioengineering with a second master's in electronics. So I did all of the electronics courses as close to electronics engineering as I could get. what I actually wanted to do was biomedical engineering. So I would have fused all of my interests, which is the taking things apart, the biology and the physics, and that would have brought me to biomedical engineering. Ultimately, what I wanted to do was to actually design medical equipment, and that actually played a role. That desire to do that still played a role in my professional journey, even as I made the transition to um, to finance. And I'll tell you this much: I actually do intend to go back to biomedical engineering, because ultimately, what I want to do is to start a biomedical engineering research and development institute in the Caribbean. And a part of that is really understanding finance to get funding and so on. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I continue to delve deeper into finance and capital markets, and trying to understand really as much as I can about that role.
Just curious, for biomedical finance, like what I'm not super familiar with the topic, but if you were to start a business, like what would be the product?
So my interest has always been advanced robotics. So really prosthesis. So that's really what I want to get to. So that again, it will all come full center with the physics, the finance, and the engineering interest. So really, what I want to do, and one of the persons I really look up to is Professor Yu Hare from MIT's Media Lab. He's a double amputee, but if you saw him walking, you would never know that he was an amputee, because his prostheses are so well integrated that his gait, which is how you walk, is almost exactly as it was before. So if you just saw him walking, you would never know that he was a double amputee. So that's ultimately the area that I was interested in. And then the finance comes in because, well, you need to be able to
You need to
fund.
finance your operations, right?
Yes,
Like things don't come out of nothing. By the
yes,
way, do you follow Boston Robotics?
yes, I do.
Yeah, it's very interesting to watch. I love
Yes.
watching that on YouTube.
So just to kind of finish the origin story and how the transition came about. So whilst I was doing my undergraduate degree in medical physics and electronics, I actually encountered one of my instructors. I was working with him as a student assistant. And on that particular day, he was looking at the stock market. And I became intrigued, because I just asked him what was he doing, and he told me he was looking up on his stocks and seeing how they were performing. And I said, stocks, what is that? And so he went on to basically give me my first masterclass in the stock market and investing and all of that. And so from there on, I basically made it a mission of mine to really understand the markets. I started to read a lot on investing. I read everything from Warren Buffett and some of the other great investors. I soon found out about Blackstone and BlackRock, started reading up on those guys, Larry Fink and Stephen Schwartzman as well. And so after finishing my degree, I started my first job at the nuclear research facility, the only nuclear research facility in Jamaica, which is the International Center for Environmental and Nuclear Sciences, ICENS. And that allowed me to put my medical physics degree into use, really looking at measuring environmental and occupational radiation exposure levels for persons who work in that field. But even whilst doing that, I kept reading on finance. I kept researching the stock market, started investing actually, and eventually I transitioned to starting my own equity research firm, as the stock market was doing really well, and persons kept asking me, because I was so public about it, they kept asking me questions on how to get started and so on. So I actually started my own equity research firm that focused on looking at the Caribbean as a whole. And we did analysis of different companies that were coming to market, whether they were doing rights issues, IPOs, and so on. And that was my official entry into making that transition from medical physics to finance. And then from there, I went on to do equity research at a boutique investment firm, worked in project management and project finance, looking at deal structuring for construction companies, real estate developments, and so on. And then eventually
Sounds like it's very organic, but it's organic, and I guess the right word might be like coincidental. So you were kind of in the right place at the right time. Like you
yes,
were pursuing what you were passionate about, what you went to school for, and then coincidentally, like you were kind of in the same room and just curious about someone managing their own personal
yes.
portfolio.
Yes, so I tell people that it was coincidence at first and then intention after that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how a lot of like careers work, right? Like for me, I know that when I went from the business program, and I had my first internship at like Brookfield and then at a pension fund, it was coincidence that I met the right people, the people that I introduced myself to, that took an interest in me and wanted to see me succeed. That was coincidence. That was luck, and a lot of hard work goes into being able to get lucky when it comes to
Yes,
careers. But then from then, it's that intention, the one that you're talking about, where you're like, okay, like it's coincidence that I've come to meet this person, see what they're doing by managing their own portfolio. But from that moment, it's very intentional. You're like, okay, like I'm interested in this.
yes. Yes, and so I still haven't really lost my lost sight of my goals or my aspirations in medical physics. I just come to realize that a lot is possible with finance, and there is also the possibility of like impact investing and so on. So
Yeah.
I look at my re-entry into that field as perhaps taking that route where ultimately, I'm looking to launch a firm where we help persons to raise capital. And then from there, I would want to fund that research facility that we would have been talking about for the first few minutes of this.
So clearly you're a planner. You're not like the person that goes like, oh, like I'm gonna kind of like go with the flow and see how things land. You're the person that clearly has like a 1 year, 2 year, 3, 5 year
Yes,
plan.
yes, yes, definitely. And it was the same with approaching the CFI courses and the designations. The FMVA itself was something that I planned to do. I actually made a very detailed schedule of it. So I looked at all the courses in the FMVA program, noted the amount of time the course hours were. So some of them were 7 hours and so on. So I added all of them and then decided and then looked at how long it would take me to complete it, and that's basically how I approach it. So I definitely agree with you. I certainly am a planner.
So one of the things I want to touch on, because I find it so hard to understand how you could go from medical physics and working in such a different field to then your first role kind of was after medical radiation physics was going and starting your own equity research. Is that correct?
Yes.
Like for me, I remember when I was first starting at the investment bank and their DCM team, it was so hard to get up to speed on everything so fast. Especially because for me, I was an off cycle hire, meaning that I didn't go directly from school to the desk. I graduated and then I actually went to the pension fund. And then they knew that I was very interested in being part of like this big analyst group at an
Yeah.
investment bank, blah, blah, blah. And so things kind of worked out in that the desk that we interfaced with, which was their DCM team, they would needed to hire. And then I was able to actually get an opportunity there. So that was a very nice and like really nice kind of like linear transition to see like, oh, like we're buying bonds from this group and I'm going to go to this desk. Even though that was it's nice and continuous in the workflow and it's very logical. So it's easy to understand what I'm doing. But it was also very difficult to learn the technical skills for me to
Yes.
literally do my job. Like at a buy side shop, I wasn't learning tons of data analysis, Excel, and Bloomberg to a degree. I was using like, kind of like 0.5% of Bloomberg's total of it, like capacity. And to learn that, even with the support and the educational programs and the learning that an investment bank provides, that training, even with that, it was challenging. For me, I had to wait 6 months before I had that training program. But once I did have the training program, it was so helpful. But I keep in mind that when we did that training, it was provided by a group that, is very expensive and comes and does this training in person, like sitting, like shoulder surfing, making sure you learn everything for like a week. But since if you didn't have that, like how are you able to learn all those things, especially from a non-business program? Like I just
Okay.
find it so amazing that you're able to make that transition. But I also, for me personally, it's just like behind the scenes, it was very challenging. So I'd love to hear more about how you were able to manage that transition.
Okay, so certainly there were challenges initially in terms of learning the lingo of business, understanding assets and the different categories of whether you're looking at different liabilities or different categories of investments generally. But as I was saying earlier, even whilst I was in my undergrad program, I was reading business books. I was reading upon companies and understanding how they were coming to market. So I would read prospectuses and basically
Oh
get
my
an
gosh, reading a
understanding.
prospectus is not fun. Like do it once and I'll
So
never do it again.
yeah, but that's fine. So for me, it was really an educational experience in and of itself. And then the more I began to understand, the more inundated I got with really delving into the intricacies of each line item of a balance sheet, for example. So if I were to go back to when I literally just started, what I did was, aside from reading those books, and I can mention one here, Rich Dad Poor Dad, that was very basic, understanding assets, liabilities, understanding cash flow, and so on. So I read all of those books. So that language I understood. When it got to reading, to understanding the actual financial statements, there was a book that was produced by Merrill Lynch and Co. It was a publication, it was the full book, but it was literally titled How to Understand Financial Statements. And so I would have that open on one side of my desk, and I would have the prospectus with the financials open on the other side of my desk. And so that's how I literally painstakingly went through the process of learning each financial statement. So it would go through the each line item of a balance sheet. Then it would do the same thing with the income statement. And that's basically how I first came to understand that. And then later, when I started to read on valuation and I got introduced to the content that Professor Aswat Damodaran would put out, I started to understand the intricacies of how do you value a company? How do you look at PE ratios and compare those to what an industry is doing? And then how does a company actually stack up in terms of its peers when you're looking at all of the specific metrics that you use to analyze that company? And so really that was a majority of the initial process. And it was that understanding that I used to write those articles that I would publish on my blogs, and to do videos that I would talk about companies that were either looking to raise money through the public markets or to raise debt. Um, so that was really how I did it. I think I might have taken the long way round to learn it, but certainly after that, I did embark on actual academic courses in accounting, finance, investment, and ultimately that it was that pursuit that led me to CFI.
Something that our listeners may or may not know about you is that you are also kind of a content creator
Yes.
and you are also a teacher. You've hosted interviews yourself. I've personally never really interviewed people until just like a month ago when I came back from my mat leave to CFI to do our podcast series. But you have so much educational content out there. I've watched one of your videos, Beyond the Stock Price, on YouTube,
Yes.
and I was just wondering how did you decide to do that? And at what point in your career did you find yourself saying like, "Hey, I want to like share the things that I learned"? And do you plan to continue to provide more educational content and continue to be a creator?
Yes, definitely. So in terms of the start, it was actually a challenge. So I've always wanted to share what I know. And as I mentioned earlier, persons were reaching out to me as I would talk about the stock market and so on. So the pretext for all of that is that at one point, the Jamaica Stock Exchange was the best performing stock exchange in the world. So with that came a lot of interest, both from local persons and the international investing community. So Jamaica, unfortunately, has a relatively low financial literacy score in terms of persons who understand the market. From a demographics point of view, only about 5% of the entire adult population invest in stocks. That has gone up in recent years, but when I started, it was more like 3%. And so, to that end, and realizing that gap, I decided that producing content would help to improve those statistics, and I thought it would work well for the country's development as a whole. And this was partly inspired by two of my mentors. Um, they've never asked anything other than I give back. So I
Oh, I love
I
that.
wanted to do that, and I thought that improving financial literacy in Jamaica was a good place to start. So that's really what got me started in producing content. But I started out writing. I was so shy about going on camera and so on, but I was actually challenged by another Canadian, Evan Carmichael, who produces a lot of content on confidence building and success principles and so on. And I had an interview with him, and he challenged me to do my first video. And so after doing that, I decided, hey, I have all this content that I've written. I can now, this is another medium where I can start to share that content. And so I started Beyond the Stock Price to share that information. As to where in my journey that came about, I want to say it was about a year and a half after I started really writing, because I had developed a lot of content. And so I just started to translate that information and then sharing that via video as well.
Have you ever been approached or even thought of teaching at your like local university? Because I mentioned that because so CFI, our original three co-founders, um, the two of them met because our co-founder was teaching at our local university, University of British Columbia, teaching finance courses. And I wonder, like, the best place that you can put information out, of course, and have the widest reach is the internet. But
Yes.
you are so clearly like what our CEO Anna likes to call it, like a lifelong learner, and not just someone that is pursuing education for their own personal pursuits, but you want to give back and to be able to share what you've learned with everyone else so that everyone can have that opportunity should they be seeking it. Would you ever consider going and teaching at like a university at one point?
Yes, definitely. I have actually held classes at our local university on investing. And in my current role, I also serve as a facilitator for what my company calls the Financial Academy, where we share. So we have over 4,000 employees. And one of the things that we try to do to help our employees to advance from a personal and financial perspective is to give them financial information and try to share with them as much as we within the finance space, because it's a bank. So we have a lot of information as it relates to helping persons to get out of debt, understanding the basics of investing and so on. So we do have this financial academy, and through that, through facilitating on that, I actually produce content on video, and I do some speaking engagements where I share the principles of personal financial management with our employees and really the wider population in Jamaica.
Oh my God, yeah. I love hearing that because for me, I just remember, as you said, your mentor said, all I ask is that you basically pay it forward, you give
Yes.
back. And like I have had a similar experience where, I've been very lucky to meet the right people at the right time, but I'll never forget. And I still remember his name. I've kept in touch. His name was Akash, and he was my boss's very good friend from an MBA school. And when I was interviewing for, like the sales and trading, rotational program, investment banking analysts are very different, very, very different topics. But I interviewed kind of for everything. And I just remember when I met him for the first time saying, and he would ask me very basic questions that were guaranteed to be asked in these interviews, like why sales like trading? Why not investment banking? Because that's the very first thing. They're like, yeah, you can apply for both. Like they're just like very, very different.
Yes.
But I just remember him saying, okay, I'm going to ask you this question. I don't expect an answer, but tell me what you think. So he'd say, like, why sales and trading? And then he would say, okay, so are you interested in being on the sales team or a trader and why? And I would give the answers that I could give, and like they weren't great, but I just remember him saying, okay, no, Mian, that's not what you say. This is what you say. And he was a trader. At that point, he'd been doing it for 10 years. And it was so instrumental. It was so incredibly helpful. And it really did. He was the person that I largely kind of credit with for me succeeding in so many interviews and making it through all these different rounds and ultimately like landing my job. So I love when I hear the story of people took an interest in me, helped me, and now I want to return the favor. And
Yes.
so when I see your social platform, I was just so excited. And there was one that I watched, and it was you had this like great kind of PowerPoint presentation you were going through. I think it was the educational piece on Bitcoin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as Bitcoin started and cryptocurrencies generally started to the popularity increase, persons in Jamaica started to become interested in that as well. And so I got the request if I could prepare something to share with an audience about cryptocurrencies and just the basics of it, trying to understand what is decentralized finance and all of that. So that's really what inspired me to prepare that presentation.
And what are you currently doing today? Like, what is your role today? And it's a longer journey to kind of be where you are today. But what do you think from your very first role has helped you to be in the position that you are today?
Okay, I love that question. So my current role today is really financial risk analyst. And so what I really do is I look at my company has a portfolio, a relatively large portfolio. We are the third or fourth largest financial institution in Jamaica. And so a part of my role is really to analyze the market risk specifically that portfolio is facing, and with the changing interest rates that we've seen over the past few years, I want to say. Well, of course, we're seeing interest rates starting to move in the other direction now, but just my role is really focused on analyzing all of the market risk that portfolio could face. In terms of the journey from where I started and how that really plays into what I am now. I mentioned I would have started in really looking at equities and specific instruments and seeing how those instruments are like priced and so on, and finding out a valuation for those instruments. That is somewhat correlated with what I do now, because those prices that I would have been looking at initially are also affected by market factors. So really, my role now is somewhat deeper on the level of analyzing the fundamental factors and those qualitative factors that create the risk that affect those prices that I would have initially and superficially been looking at when I just started.
And then you want to so you've had several kind of different roles within finance, like from equity
Yes.
research to where you are now. There's been some other interesting kind of pivots in between.
Yes.
And I wanted to, like, did you want to share the in between part?
Oh,
So I found
yeah.
that to be super interesting.
Yeah, sure. So from equity research, I went to project finance and then to capital markets. So I actually spent time on both sides of the seesaw, if you will. So on one side, you might have the client facing, which is really where I did most of my equity analyst work. And then I spent some time with another great financial institution here in Jamaica as a capital market analyst. So from that perspective, what I was doing was looking at how do we create structures, either structured debt type deals or equity type deals for companies that are looking to raise capital. And of course, intertwined in that is actually looking at the operational risk of those companies, the market risk of those companies, as well as the strategic risk for those companies. So a part of the job really allowed me to see effectively the full spectrum of capital markets. And so to that end, I actually also looked at the capital markets and securities analyst designation. So it was, in fact, after going through my role in capital markets that I came back to CFI and completed the CMSA designation.
And it's so rare that things work out so nicely, but like all
Yes,
of this information for you is going to at least this is going to really help, and not help, but it's just been a perfect set of experiences for you to springboard into creating what you want to do ultimately is your own company. The
that too
one
is
that
intentional. So that was also intentional.
it's
So,
like at the end of the day, it's like you have all this knowledge in like biological engineering and medical physics, but it's very difficult to be a successful entrepreneur if all you know is the topic of like the type of business you want to create, but you don't understand the underlying fundamentals of how to finance a business.
yes.
And so, like,
So
it's
I'll
just,
also share something else with you on that very same point. So I worked before joining the International Center for Environmental and Nuclear Sciences. I worked with my lecturer, that the same one that initially showed me the stock market. I worked with him as a graduate research assistant, and what we did was we developed an automated wastewater monitoring system. So that's also a part of how my R&D interest comes about. But um, to that end, the major challenge we faced was with financing. So we were experts at the design, we were experts at understanding the data. But our challenge really was in putting that in a package so that we could offer it to investors to get persons to support the lab. And so that was an experience that really showed me the importance of understanding not just the technicalities of whatever it is you're trying to design, but also the financial side of the equation as well. An investor wants to know you're doing something great, but they also want to know that it's financially sustainable and that it's going to provide a positive return on investment for them, unless it is that they're doing it solely from an altruistic or an impact investing point of view. So that experience really showed me the importance of understanding both sides of the coin.
yeah, because it's so important to realize that you could have a great idea. You could
Yes.
have the best product, regardless of what is, whether it's technology or healthcare related. But if that isn't financially viable, if it is not profitable, and also as a founder, if you don't understand the basics of financial accounting and basically speak the language of, you know, basic business, it
Yes.
becomes very difficult to be able to realize that founder's kind of entrepreneur's dream.
Yes. Yeah.
But given that context, I would love for you to share with our audience if you could give yourself kind of like 10 years ago a little piece of advice, what would it be? Like to see where you are now. I'm sure there's going to be tons of people that tune in and are listening and say, you know, Devrhoid has this great experience where everything has been coincidence at beginning and then very intentional. But maybe the person that's listening today does not have such good fortune lately, or maybe is just a little bit curious about, how does this actually happen? Because maybe their circumstances are very different. What's just the type of advice that you might give our audience?
So aside from being intentional, and I could delve into that a bit, I would only say two words, and it's to stay curious. My curiosity I think, has been outside of being intentional, which really follows from my curiosity. I think my curiosity is really what I would credit with the experience that I've had so far. At any point, I could have not I could have not invested in my interest. I could have, in that very first instance where I saw Dr. Clark going over his investments, it would have
Yeah.
been nothing to just look at it and then turn out and go back to what I was being paid to do as his research assistant. But that curiosity to just ask the question, what are you doing? Is really what earned me the opportunity to get that first masterclass. And then as I delved into the markets, I read books and I learned more. I saw other things that I didn't understand, and I pursued the curiosities that I had around those things. So I think that by just being curious and not being afraid to ask questions, it can really, really change the dynamic of one's situations.
I love that. Like, it's so simple, but it's hard to practice, but it's always great to hear. Just it's it's so it's like so empowering, just the idea of keep it simple, be curious, take calculated risks,
Yes. So
but
be
ask
intentional
questions
also.
and be curious. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love it. And like, what a way to close off the podcast. I've been so fascinated by your background and to see where you have started and where you end up, and to realize that people can come from all sorts of different backgrounds and end up in finance, and to see that someone has such a passion for learning and teaching, and being able to hear your story of how you wanted to just help improve the financial literacy rate of Jamaica by putting all that content out there has been like super inspirational.
Yes. Thank you, Mian. It's certainly been a pleasure talking with you, and also getting to understand more about your journey. And I want to extend my thanks to you as a part of the CFI team, because the
Oh,
education that you guys have prepared and have shared with us has really allowed us to take that further step into the formal financial field, and to continue to excel as a professional. So you're inadvertently or intentionally supporting my continuing educational journey just by the work that you do at CFI. So I'm very grateful to you and to the entire CFI team for that.
oh my gosh, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you were here.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
yes, thank you everyone for tuning in. That has been the conversation for me, Mian, and Devrhoid for today. And I hope that you will join us soon on another episode. Bye for now, everyone.
Thanks for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. FinPod is brought to you by Corporate Finance Institute, the #1 rated online provider of finance and banking training, certifications, and productivity tools.